Good afternoon. Nice to have you.
Hello.
All right, so get your names down. All right. Great. All right, so this one, this is a traditional assignment, right? It's not an argumentative format. It just entails a PBS video and answering the questions to that video, right? And so you have the questions up here on the top. Those 10 questions, there is the URL for the PBS video on the War of 1812. Then this one's pretty straightforward. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context to the video, okay? And so firstly, right, especially context and especially in the Ohio Valley, the future states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio, up here where you see in the Great Lakes area, okay? Sovereignty was highly contested. You had the Winnebago, the Potawatomi, the Miami, the Shawnee. You had a myriad of tribes who had land claims, historical land claims to that area. And then you have a Treaty of Fort Stanwix, Stanwix, and the British granted conquest rights to the Iroquois nation over much of that land. And the other tribes begged to differ with that treaty, obviously. Then in addition to that, when we had our Confederation, we purchased, claimed to have purchased that land, of course, without the consent of all the tribes during our Confederacy, and known as the Northwest Ordinances. If you wanted to look those up, you could find information on this topic. The Northwest.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you? I don't find this assignment.
Let me make sure that it's on there. Maybe I'm not up to date.
The Great Man History is my last one on the modules, and when I look at the assignments, I don't see what you are looking at right now.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, I will rectify that. Okay, Mr. Virog. Sorry about that. I will add it to Canvas, Fort Worth. All right. I will do that as soon as I can. But this is what you will find connected to it. This document with the URL and those 10 questions, doing a PBS video on the War of 1812. So this one's not an argumentative format as usual, but a much more traditional type of an assignment. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up to me. I wasn't aware that it was not on there. I will update it as soon as I can, hopefully as soon as we're done with this video. Okay, and so sovereignty was contested, especially in the Ohio Valley. You had the Iroquois having claims over all these tribes. They had been fighting with one another. The fur trade brought in a lot of drama. The English and the French fighting over and making different allies of different tribes just exacerbated the situation. And then during the War for Independence and during the Confederation, we had, or just before the War for Independence and during the Confederation, we had rebellions there in the Ohio Valley on behalf of the Native American tribes. So there was a lot to be settled, for lack of a better way of putting it. And the British still had not evacuated their forts from the Ohio Valley. So the British were still there as we saw it, as interlopers on our soil. And much of this land had still not become states. And so it was formal, public domain, as we called it. And the Land Survey Office was surveying it, trying to ascertain what belonged to what tribe and what was open and claimed by the US government. And then by the time of 1787 with the Constitution, right, when we mentioned a couple times, or Indians, unassimilated Indians not taxed. It's just a step or two away from the Supreme Court decisions that will come later that declare the Native Americans to be a nation within the nation. So they're somewhat sovereign. They're not beholden to particular states and the state's laws and sovereignty, but they are the wards of the federal government. WARD, an award, right, is like children from an orphanage. It's a very dependent political identity that the Native Americans were held under. And so for the first administration or two, with Washington and Adams, especially with Washington, you find that he's going to try to be a bit conciliatory. The main people in charge of it, besides the land surveying office, are the lieutenant governor, as well as the Secretary of War was actually placed over relations with the Native Americans. And so then you do a little great man history and you find that, different secretaries of war, different lieutenant governors had different personalities, had different agendas, and had shorter and longer leashes to give them latitude, more or less latitude, to do as they sought. And that's why in the video, it's going to make a villain of the Lieutenant Governor, William Henry Harrison, Harrison. He'll become our 8th president, very briefly, by the way. But at any rate, he came in, and from 1802 to 1809, he bought a lot of land from Native Americans, offering them much land. And there was nothing uniform about it. He tried tribe by tribe. He tried basically bribery. And then sometimes he tried intimidation. But by 1802, you had Jefferson in the White House. And Jefferson has a policy of trying to assimilate the Native Americans by the first 8 years of the 1800s. So they tried to get them, the Native Americans, to live like white men. And they ordered that they should have schools established, that they should farm and become cash crop farmers, or at least subsistence farmers, and that they learn the white man's language, and that they accept Christianity, even though Jefferson wasn't much of a religious man. And so at any rate, the pressure really was put on them when Thomas Jefferson entered the White House. The natives.
Is this when they started those awful boarding schools for the kids?
Not yet. Yeah, they're going to begin those after the Trail of Tears, and we'll get to that with Andrew Jackson just rather shortly, rather soon. But yeah, they'll begin that in the mid 1800s. So here, right, there's pressure for them to assimilate. Some of the Native Americans actually became accommodating, like Little Turtle, and trying to press the other Native Americans to assimilate to kind of WASP, Anglo-American culture. And then others did not. And so you had formal petitions about the land sales, because some land sales, oh my goodness, some were 1 cent per acre, some sales, and then others went up to $2 an acre, 1 cent an acre to $2 an acre, right? During the same deflationary period of the market and the money's value. That's a huge, chasm. And so it's just evidently you could spend a semester on this topic of all the intricacies of the different leaders and so forth. You had a guy, like I said, Little Turtle ended up switching over, but you had Pontiac and his rebellion. And then you're going to have the development of the clash at Vincennes. And at Vincennes, you're going to have the prophet, Tenskwatawa, and his brother Tecumseh versus William Henry Harrison. And they're already going to establish, they're trying to get as many pioneers, Anglo-American pioneers, to move into the territory as possible. And they're going to try to outnumber them. And you're going to see that Polk later on was familiar with that type of gradual imperialism, where you just begin to simply outnumber that demographic of people as a first step of conquest. And so you see that here in the Ohio Valley. And then the prophet, he contended, there was another man named Handsome Lake who contended, who rose in the same manner, contended that they'd had an epiphany with the Great Spirit, with the great creator God, and that the great creator God had assured them that if they would just return to their native ways and stay away from the white man's alcohol and from the white man's bad habits and vices, that the Great Spirit would wipe the white man off the face of their earth, off the red man's earth. And so he began having rallies. He even at one time predicted a solar eclipse. And so he started getting he was a shaman. He started gaining like religious notoriety and contending that the Great Spirit was telling the Native Americans to unite all the tribes to kick the paleface, the white man, off their land. And William Henry Harrison played the villain. He tried to discredit them. Then he began to threaten them. Then he looked for grounds upon which he could arrest them, and conflict will ensue. As a matter of fact, that's where it does ensue, is at a place called Tippecanoe. There was a brief but violent battle at Tippecanoe in Indiana. And the American forces are going to prevail, but they're going to find English guns amongst the dead Native Americans that they buried. And they had evidence of Tecumseh meeting with a couple of British officers. And so this is going to be one of the two reasons for which we formally declare war against Great Britain and her allies, is for fomenting rebellion amongst our Native Americans. All right. Then you have Tennessee and Kentucky. And you have a specific demographic of people that come into Tennessee, Kentucky, who develop a negative reputation as being very, uber libertarian and imperialistic. And they are the Scots-Irish. And we're going to talk more about them when we do Andrew Jackson and his time period. But the Scots-Irish came in large numbers during the War for Independence. And they're going to be known as the Long Knives, with their famous Bowie knives. They'll be known as the Long Knives to the Native Americans in the Kentucky and Tennessee region. And in that area, about this time, there will occur the Duck Creek Massacre. All right, the Duck Creek Massacre. And so you have Anglo-Native American fighting in this area as well. All right. And then you have land speculators in the Ohio Valley and in Mississippi and Alabama, whereby you had some illegal stuff going on, people selling land to unbeknownst to their purchasers that did not even exist, or that was inhabited by native tribes that had never given their consent to selling that land. It was just a mess with these land speculators. But that was happening in Ohio Valley, in Mississippi, and in Alabama. And lands upon which they were largely infringing upon were creek lands. So when war breaks out, the Creek engage at the massacre at Fort Mims in Alabama. And this is carried by the press and depicts the Creek nation as savage because they killed men, women, and children, unarmed persons, people who felt like if they would just go within the fort that they were safe, that they wanted no part of fighting, and they were massacred nonetheless. And then you have international context. The Continental, later the Napoleonic Wars, right? And so Louis XVI was related to royalty and a couple other countries, nearby countries. Those nearby countries threatened war if Louis XVI were to be harmed during the French Revolution. And as you probably know, in hindsight, they executed him. They beheaded him. So on behalf of Louis XVI, also the Gironde losing power to the more arguably radical Jacobins. This provoked the Holy Alliance against revolutionary France. And that was Austria, Great Britain, and Prussia, one of the 39 states of Germany. All right, and then at this time, you had notions of just war doctrine from the Catholic Church. And the two categories are why you fight and how you fight. They have Latin terms for each of them. Casus belli and jus ad bellum. Why you fight and how you fight. And the how you fight, the jus ad bellum. They formulated notions of discriminating between combatants and non-combatants, right? So men in uniform are to fight one another. They're not to fight under certain holy days of the year. They're not to come in and just ravage a village and kill men, women, and children, right? And along with that, began evolving the evolution of the notion of neutral nations' rights. And within that was the right to freely trade non-contraband, Contraband means against the list. So on that list, as you can imagine, of exceptions, is anything to do with war materiel. You can't claim to be neutral and help arm one of two fighting countries, right? But if you're dealing with clothing, textiles, food, that clearly was never put on the contraband list. And thus you were entitled in this evolutionary political tradition throughout Europe to be able to trade with one or both or several warring nations, non-war material. However, you have London and Berlin decrees announced blockades against their enemies. And these blockades were to be complete, thorough. So hence including food and clothing and non-contraband. And it seemed like it was it seemed like it was being carried out in a spirit of might makes right. That Napoleon knew how powerful he was at that time with the Berlin decrees, and said, basically told the world, what are you going to do about it? And said he was going to try to starve the British Isles into submission. And the British did the same. All right. Then in addition to that, the British Navy had a highly publicized problem with absconding, with runaways. So they would come to ports, stop in American ports, and they would get out and run away and hide in the population. And I find it interesting also is the gradual, acquisition of accents. According to David Hackett Fisher, the Southern drawl comes from the gentrymen of East Anglia and other areas of England. And the British, the Boston sharp accent evolving from Bristol and Liverpool of England, from the cities of England, from the bourgeoisie. So I find it interesting that them carrying their accents here, I would imagine that the manner by which within the old British Empire, geographic location, geographic, distance and time and custom have really hardened the differences. So that to this day, right, you could hear someone speaking English and say, okay, that's an Australian accent. Oh, that's an Irish accent. Oh, that's a Southern drawl. But what do they all share in common? They're speaking English, right? So at any rate, I'd like to think that distancing and formation of very distinctive dialects and accents was not well formed yet, just a generation after our war for independence. So hence it wouldn't have been as easy in 1812 to hear someone who sounds as distinctly un-American as one would today from London with an English accent, right? And being able to ascertain that he clearly is not an American, but a runaway British naval private sailor. So at any rate, it was more difficult to discern. Not only that, when you look at immigration tendencies, American immigration was primarily, you don't get to a lot of the the diversity of this country until the Gilded Age. I would make the argument. And the Gilded Age is like from after the Civil War to 1900, where you got a lot of Southern, Central, and Eastern European, Near Eastern, and Asian, and other sources of immigration into this country. So America was a lot more WASP, a lot more white Anglo-Saxon Protestant demographically at this time. And so hence it would have been easier at that time for a British runaway to try to hide away in the Americas as a disguised American. And then in the States, they had identification cards. Remember, they're not going to go by fingerprints until the 1890s, photographs until at least then, if not later. Of course, we had photography by the 1890s, but you know what I mean, and taking mug shots. I would make the argument until the 1920s. So people would write a physical description of you on a piece of paper, your birth time and place, your family name, and that would be your identification. Well, thus developed a black market for writing identification papers for runaway British sailors.
They did write, no, they did draw them as well, no?
I think they did. I think they did draw them. I think that is true, Mr. Virag. But my goodness, right? I mean, like morphology, the way the human body, the human face and everything changed in the aging process. You know, how in the heck does that work if they draw you in your 20s and you're caught in your 50s?
Yeah, or even just really someone telling what I look like, and if I know what they said, then I can just change it easily.
That's right. Those characteristics,
Yeah.
huh?
So it was basically impossible to catch anyone.
So it became very difficult to catch people.
Mhm.
And I'm saying all this as context because the English lost patience and they began to exercise their right to recapture runaways in a very heavy-handed way, a very kind of arrogant and arbitrary way. They began stopping American ships, merchant ships, and in a few famous cases, American naval ships coming aboard and going, lining the men up and finding some of the men that they felt were British runaways. I have no idea how in the world they could come up with a number, you know, they didn't have a real sophisticated census bureau at this time in the early 1800s. But it's one of my books, it might be this one, but one of my books on 1812 states that at least 8,000 American young men were wrongfully impressed into the British Navy as so-called runaways. So it became a big problem. All right. And not to mention, they were confiscating our stuff in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic and in the Caribbean. The French were doing it, the French Navy, as was the British Navy. So you'll see in the video, His Majesty's Leopard ship, naval ship versus the USS Chesapeake. The American Chesapeake refused to stop. They began attacking it. They took the young men and humiliated them and grabbed a handful of those aboard the Chesapeake and brought them onto the Leopard. And the video makes another point, is the Congress by the War of 1812 was one of the youngest Congresses we've ever had. And this is up to you to decide how much to invest in this as a, you know, contextually relevant fact. But they suggest in the video that because more congressmen were in their 30s and were young men in this second generation of our republic, that, you know, I guess being filled literally more with testosterone and being more prideful, they were not going to abide by insults to our national dignity as a nation. So it became inexcusable and something that needed to be rectified and something that even needed to be avenged. So the two official reasons, right? The U.S. went to war versus Great Britain and her allies is one was fomenting rebellion amongst the Native Americans, like Tecumseh, who was trying to unite all the Native American tribes to kick us out of the West, and violating our international rights as a neutral nation amidst the Napoleonic Wars. All right. This War of 1812. So who did we fight in the War of 1812? Great Britain and her allies, her Native American allies, particularly. How is Canada connected to the story? You're going to see a three-pronged invasion attempt of Canada, which obviously, knowing that Canada is still under Great Britain today, you know that that did not succeed in trying to liberate them. And I gave you some context to number 4. How does William Harrison play the villain in the narrative? But it'll give you more in the video. The two official reasons the U.S. declared war, we just went over them. And everything else is pretty cut and dry right out of the video. All right. Again, I'm not particularly proud of this format. It's kind of passe. It's kind of lower level thinking, just kind of, you know, retention of what you're listening to and regurgitating those facts on a piece of paper. So hence we only do this once during the semester. I've just have yet to devise an argumentative write-up to this date on the War of 1812. So I want to warn you, the video is a little long, it's a little dry, but it's pretty respectable in the amount of data that it covers and covering the war. So does anybody have any basic questions going into this assignment when you do this one? It's going to have a unifying effect on the country. There are going to be calls for rather vindictive calls, to be honest, to take away the Native Americans' lands that decided to fight against us. And by the way, those who fought against us, a lot of them, like the Creek, were known for the red ochre that they put on their tomahawks. So the euphemism for the bad Native Americans was red sticks. that we will fight against in the War of 1812. And some tribes did not unify, either for or against us. Some literally were split. But just at the end of the War of 1812, ironically, we're going to have just the Jeffersonian Liberal Party. The Federalist Party will quit. And it issues in a time known as the era of good feelings and into the 1820s, when there's just one political party. So that's kind of anomalous in our country's history. But what's ironic is that one political party of Jefferson's embraced Hamilton's vision, his economic vision for the country. They wanted to subsidize, industrialize, commercialize, diversify, and become a self-sufficient economic giant, so we don't have to worry about being bullied by Great Britain ever again. Something as simple as the educational system in the time of the era of good feelings. They began truncating the English language. So like the word honor and many words like it were initially H-O-N-O-U-R. We took off the U, and that was meant to be symbolic, that we're not as pretentious as the English, and we're devising an American English language. Kids received court history in school, how wonderful George Washington was, how wonderful the country is and its leaders. A lot of patriotism imbued in it. But it's not going to end well for the Native Americans. And as you'll see in the video, they decided status antebellum. They decided whoever owned and controlled whatever land before the war owns and controls it now. So ostensibly not 1 inch of land was gained by the US government, with the exception of taking lands from the Red Sticks at the end of the war.
And, how bad were these battles? So how did the tribes eventually survive, or these were basically the end of some of the tribes?
No, the scope of the battles and the fighting was relatively small. I don't mean to discount it, how bloody it was, because of course, right, you had massacres on both sides, and goodness, what was it? The Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Was one of the bloodiest. And I think we ended up massacring fewer than 1,000 Native Americans, but we massacred hundreds of them. So just like I said, I feel callous saying that. I don't mean it in a way, in a callous manner at all. But I just mean the way that our view of war has changed, right? Like to total war from World War II, and just demolishing entire cities and killing hundreds of thousands of people. You know, in World War I and World War II, losing, you know, tens of thousands of men in a single day. Nothing like that.
I heard that some richer people who did not actually participate in the battle, they didn't know where it was, and they just went and did some picnic and they were watching the battle. Is that true? They did things like that?
Yes, they did at the beginning of the Civil War.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
the
is
first
something.
battle of Bull Run, they had picnics. Yeah, that changed though. That didn't
Well, I suppose, yes.
that didn't last long after that battle. Yeah, but hence the idea, right? That the old notion was just that, is that combatants will fight it out. Maybe at the most hundreds will die, and and it'll only be men in uniform. And yeah, the Civil War and the World Wars, the First and Second World Wars, really really upped that game, really changed our view, our perception of war, and our practice of it in a very scary manner. So yeah, the Creek, they won't disintegrate entirely as a tribe. Neither will the Shawnee, another major tribe involved. The Cherokee were kind of split. The Choctaw were split. But they all survived in pretty decent numbers, the War of 1812. But their lands and entitlement to their lands, that's going to be challenged.
And so what was it after? I just it's just hard to imagine. So there is a tribe, they don't have any more land. So what are they gonna do? They're just gonna go somewhere, or what do they do normally?
Yeah, they relocate. And usually the historical narrative, they usually head west. Yeah,
Because there were no white people on the west yet. So
that's right.
well, that was the assumption of them, that there will not be, but
Yeah, and that's going to morph into, by the time of Andrew Jackson, a notion of putting them on reservations in the West. The West being the safe haven for them against Eastern seaboard civilization that keeps spreading westwardly from the Atlantic coast. Yeah. And some will move up into Canada. Yeah. All right. So that's usually the context I give to the War of 1812, and everything else you should be able to discern from the video, if you don't mind. All right, so any last minute questions?
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And we have 4 quizzes that are all due on Sunday.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for, or no, 3.
Oh. one-
Yeah, you should have 3.
1, 2, 3. No, it says quiz 1, chapter 2, quiz 2, chapter 5, quiz 3, Constitution, and then test number 2.
Oh, and is
Yeah,
your
because,
test number 2, is that also due by November 7th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, do your best. I'll send out an announcement, but that actually is the same date that I gave my regular start classes. So send me a Canvas announcement if you're having problems with that. If I even get just a couple, I'll move the due date back.
Okay.
All right. But yeah, thank you for reminding me. I need to send out an announcement.
Okay. No problem.
All right.
And then this, what we just talked about, is due when, since that's not on here yet.
So let's see here. This actually, though, your test 2, this is the week of the 4th.
Mm-hmm.
Your early, I have on my calendar, your early Republic is due in 2 days.
What?
Not see that under.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And the War of 1812 is due on the 10th. Yeah, let me clarify that and I'll give you guys an announcement.
Okay,
Because you're supposed to have, right, alternating, what is it, 4 and 5 days for each of these?
Yeah, for
And
for five.
I can't imagine you guys reaching my regular start classes, you having started so much later than they did, although they get 7 days for each assignment. I can't imagine you catching them just yet.
because
So
we have
the
history of
drifting-
great man, I'm sorry, due on Saturday,
Yes,
the 6th, and then 1812 due on the 10th. And then these 5 tests due on Sunday. Yes, Sorry.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
so your test 2 should not be due until the 15th.
okay, yeah, because it says the 7th on here. It says due date the 7th.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll announce it in Canvas. And I'll do the same as I did with my regular starting classes. See, their test 2 is due on the 7th. 8 days before yours. And so I have their quizzes due the same day. And so I'll move your first 3 quizzes to the 15th, the same day as the test 2 as well.
Okay, so just to be clear, ignore what is currently on the 7th and you're gonna change them. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay,
That's
Okay.
right.
perfect.
All right. So yeah, to me, that's consistent. You guys started much later than my other class did in 17A. And so I'll, if you don't mind, I'll have it the same day as test 2, just like theirs. But your day of test 2 is the 15th, not the 7th.
Okay. But will we have any quizzes due this weekend still, or no? Sorry.
No, no.
Okay,
By all
I'm sorry.
means, I'll try to encourage you in my announcement not to procrastinate
right.
and not wait until just prior to the 15th.
Oh, yeah, no, of
Quizzes.
course.
But yeah, you'll have until the 15th.
Okay, super. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for bringing that to my attention.
All right. Okay, that was all I had.
All right. All right. So yeah, that's all I have for today. And I'll let you know by way of announcements. Again, we're pretty far ahead of schedule. So I'm not sure when I'm going to cover. The next thing to cover is test 2. And your test 2 is not due until the 15th. That's 9 days from now. So I'll probably just do I'll probably just do it one of the 2 days next week.
Well, and next week, Thursday, there's no school because it's Veterans Day. So,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I didn't know that. Okay. That's good to know.
So I
so
guess it'd
maybe-
have to be Tuesday.
Yeah. So maybe we'll just do it Tuesday then at noon. Okay.
so Tuesday review test.
Yeah,
Right.
so Tuesday we'll run through the test. Now remember, with test 2 and 3, I don't go through all of them like I do test 1. It being college, I just don't. I usually just don't feel comfortable doing that. I trust you guys can discern from your argumentative assignments almost solely most of the answers to the test. But I'll look through the argumentative assignments. And anything that's not really cut and dry that I don't find rather easily, I'll volunteer on Tuesday.
Okay. And we can also have question, right? If we
And of course,
check it out.
of course. And then I'll give you the opportunity to ask about any specific questions. All right.
All right. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I enjoy this class.
I like
All
to.
right. And so yeah, you guys, that's all I have for today. I have your names down. You'll get your extra credit. And stick with it. We're going through it rather quickly. We're already getting to test 2. of only 3 tests.
All right.
All
Thank you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Have a
All right,
good rest of the
guys.
day.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You have a nice rest of your day as well. And
Have a good
Mr.
weekend.
Mia and Hassani,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you. All right, have a good one.
You too.